When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody. This is Mark Ledlow with the Fearless Mindset Podcast, and today we have joining us is Bruce Wimmer. Is it Wimmer or Weimer, Bruce?
Wimmer.
Wimmer. Bruce Wimmer. Bruce has been in this industry in security, how many, about 20 plus, 30 years now, Bruce?
I wish it were only that much, but yeah, counting the Air Force, we're talking about 49 years.
49 years is... It'll take most of the guys that are industry leaders out of the game. That's a lot of experience there, Bruce.
Yeah, that makes me pretty old. That's why I'm a senior director.
That's right. And you've been...
a lot of people get that title for different reasons, but mine is pretty well age-related. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for coming on, Bruce. The week of Christmas. Honored to have you. Robert Dodge, of course, speaks highly of you because you work with Robert there at G4S.
Exactly.
So to tell the audience a little bit about your story, you spent, like as you said, 21 years in the Air Force as a special agent, and your deal was espionage. You're like a spy over there, breaking up spy stuff. And business espionage.
Counter espionage. So my job was to, I was trained in intelligence, but I served in OSI in counter espionage and in major centers like Tokyo, Washington, D.C., London, Berlin, Germany. So a lot of hands-on experience at dealing with intelligence services and espionage.
Fun. And then you're sharing with me on the phone offline that you actually had a contract for your life by Al-Qaeda at one time. That was crazy when you told me that. I was like, wow, that's nuts.
Yeah, well, that was on the terrorism side in Karachi, Pakistan. That was in the private sector in November of 1997. Before a lot of people had even heard much of Al-Qaeda and a guy named Osama bin Laden.
Right.
But he was behind, and Al-Qaeda was behind an attack on 5 Union Texas petroleum workers, and that's how I got involved. They were killed, and I went to Karachi and to Pakistan to try and help foreign companies deal with the threats with our office in Pakistan, and Al-Qaeda didn't take kindly to that.
Yeah, they didn't like that too much.
Threat vectors tend not to like people who are trying to protect their targets. So,
right. And you also were busy enough to where you authored the book, Business Espionage, Risk, Threats, and Countermeasures. That was a pretty successful book that you had, right?
Yes, very good. And again, a lot of examples, real-world examples of the level of espionage going on, particularly in the business world, which frankly surprised me as I left the government military service. I kind of thought that aspect of my business, my experience, would not be something that would have a lot of demand on it unless I was in that high tech or defense industry, then maybe. But no, I ended up living in Taipei, Taiwan, in Beijing, China, and in Hong Kong, and being responsible for countering business espionage throughout the Asia Pacific region. And I found, wow, incredible levels of business spying going on.
Now, from what I heard from Robert, you're very successful at catching these spies that are doing the espionage, and you had a knack for busting them.
Yes.
And that's
we did have a lot of success, and this kind of prompted me when I wrote the book, and as I deal with companies and try and help them to develop, or individuals develop programs for countering spying. It's much the same as it was in the Air Force. When I was in Berlin, Germany, it was before, during, and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, a 3-year period. We had more espionage cases dealing with the Air Force in Berlin than they'd had the entire history of the Air Force presence in occupied Berlin. And a lot of people were like, wow, you and your team are really successful. And yes, we were. But the reason, and the same thing I saw in the private sector, is because other Air Force members who before didn't really understand how the threat worked and the level of threat, now you get to the business side. I'm living in, for example, Beijing, China, and found a lot of employees, particularly expatriate employees assigned there, did not understand the threat. And when they are educated and aware of the threats and the techniques used, then they spot things and they refer them to you, and then you can take countermeasures. It's a team. It's not us doing all the work by ourselves. It's a team. And that's the most effective.
Now, where are we now with all the cyber warfare? Is that the same thing as espionage, or is that a different animal?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the interesting thing. A lot of people are aware of the cyber espionage because we've done a good job of educating. What did we just see a couple days ago? Solar wind, and it's brought up with its name. Everyone begins to relate. And because we store a lot of information on IT systems, we can understand, yeah, that's what it is. They're breaking into our IT systems. It's all about cyber. Well, cyber is very, very important because so much information is stored on IT systems. But it is not the only way that spies operate. And in fact, cyber espionage and other means are linked. And what you find is whenever there's cyber espionage, there are other techniques used because intelligence services and spies know that you need to come after the target from multiple perspectives. So that's just alerting us that we have a serious espionage problem, but it's not limited to cyber. Cyber is a part of the overall business espionage threat.
Now, going back to that day, they got hit pretty hard a few days ago with that one attack that hit the media. Do they really know, like the State Department, do they really know who did that, or are they estimating, or they guess? What does that look like?
Sometimes they know. Sometimes they have to make what we hope would be intelligent guesses. In this case, I think they do have some good evidence linking it to Russian cyber penetration teams, but what we heard today is so typical. Now they're saying, well, there are some other threat vectors besides what we saw in this particular instance. Yes, always. There are always multiple vectors coming after, especially if a state, a government is involved.
Now, is it hard to prove what foreign national country is behind it, or is it pretty easy to prove those?
Sometimes it's relatively easy, and sometimes it is difficult. The good news is, even though I was a special agent and even though I was involved in the arrest of, for example, Air Force members for prosecution as spies, we're not always just about proof in the legal sense. So what we want to do is have an idea for protective purposes, but again, what that's basically telling me is if we think we have some pretty good evidence, not in the legal sense, but necessarily, but if we've got some evidence that it is the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Cubans, whoever it is, then we can look at who else might be involved. And we might also see that there are multiple organizations within. So you might see the Chinese civilian intelligence services, the Ministry for State Security, but you might also see the People's Liberation Army and their special espionage units. Or you might see the former KGB, renamed under Vladimir Putin, but basically the Foreign Intelligence Services, SBC. But you might also see the military, GRU, Soviet, now Russian military. So you often see multiple organizations involved in targeting.
Now, Bruce, who do you think is our biggest adversary right now? Because we just had, the elections take place. Dominion is a big topic right now. Software. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. I say conspiracy theories because I don't know. I haven't seen anything. So what is your thoughts on Dominion, the elections, and who might be behind that?
Well, I think this is what is interesting. If you go all the way back to early discussions in the political sense, whenever you start mixing politics, then you start potentially shifting the facts a little bit.
Okay.
And maybe a lot. So the bottom line is that we can be very, very certain that a number of state intelligence services are involved in trying to gather information on both sides, both parties, on the government, on the private sector. That is what they do. So there will be multiple, there will be civilian, there will be military from multiple governments gathering information. And guess what? The United States has intelligence services, including in the military, and those services are also trying to gather information, get sources, and figure out what's happening in other governments all around the world. This goes with adversarial relations and sometimes even friendly relations in the international realm.
Well,
if I had to say the
stuff.
biggest threats we face, it would be the Chinese, the Russians, but also we have to deal with friends who are on the business side. Now I'm talking business.
Right.
We have Taiwan, we have South Korea, we have France, we have Israel. Lots of countries that we would call allies, and they are, but in business, they're going to try and get some information. So
right.
The French have been very, very active. The Israelis, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, all of these have business espionage going on, maybe as a government and sometimes as the private sector alone. But guess what? A lot of these countries have part of their business is linked to the government. We struggle with that in the United States because there's far more separation, probably less than we think there is sometimes, but it is government direct link. There are state-owned enterprises in the private sector. That brings what used to be, you were concerned about the military and what kind of international relations you had from a diplomatic standpoint. Those are all important. But it's not just that. We're looking at the private sector and business. And there are competitor companies in all of these countries.
Right. Wow. Now here's something that has kind of came to my mind, Bruce. I know we have the Central Intelligence Agency, we have the NSA, and then we have Army Intelligence, we have Air Force Intelligence, and then you have Jason Bourne, the movie. And everybody's fascinated with Jason Bourne. I love to watch that stuff. So where would you parallel Jason Bourne activity? Would that be under the umbrella of the CIA, or would that be under the umbrella of the NSA? What's your take on that?
Well, all of those. Probably a little bit more the CIA and some of the other intelligence agencies in the military, as you mentioned. Those are going to be more along that line. NSA is going to be more in the IT and the monitoring of various kinds of communication. But they again overlap. In the intelligence world, we would work together against targets and come after them, just what I talked about, from multiple threat vectors. So in the private sector, and interestingly, again, it mirrors what happens in the government often, we're going to have cybersecurity incidents and IT threats because we store so much valuable information and because so much communications takes place in cyberspace. So there goes without saying there's going to be a threat vector there. But they're also trying to recruit and plant spies, people in organizations. And this doesn't have to be a Jason Bourne. This may be someone who doesn't even really understand initially what they're doing. They get recruited or they get sent into a company or a government to get a position and give insider information. It's not all outside threats they're also trying to recruit and run and handle agents on the inside. And then you have the technical penetrations, which are not cyber per se, but some information may be transmitted that way. But these are the traditional bugs that people talk about: planting listening devices, cameras. The catch is, from the days I started almost 50 years ago till now, wow, what a change. We had what were called rollover cameras that the Soviet spies would use. Now we have so many capabilities for taking covert pictures. We've got everything from our mobile device to pens, to packs of gum, to cigarette lighters, to ink pens, to lapel pins, to tie tacks, to glasses. It's an incredible, all of the different devices. And we have so much Internet of Things. So we have things like Alexa, Google, all kinds of listening devices. One of the things I tried to get home to people during this COVID-19 pandemic, we have a number of companies that have a large number of their employees working from home.
Right.
Now, the trouble with insiders working from home is they can steal a lot of information that they couldn't steal as easily in the office if people are trained, and if you have security and are watching, and if you have regulations and rules like you can't bring a mobile telephone device into this area.
Wow.
If I could tell you dozens upon dozens of times, cybersecurity, the IT people are just so proud of themselves, and they've done a good job. They have frozen all ports. You can't download anything. You cannot directly access the internet, only to send inter-office communications. And you can't print anything without permission, and all kinds of protective measures, which are good in many cases. But the trouble is, you've got someone coming in from India, sitting there taking pictures with their mobile device, and they've downloaded nothing, sent nothing, printed nothing, but they've copied the information.
Right.
So you have to look at the threats, and you look at COVID-19, you have people driving by, war drivers, right now, thousands of them gathering. Some of them are business-oriented, some are states, governments doing it, intelligence services, and sometimes freelancers trying to get information to see who they might be able to sell it to. They're doing trash covers because people are printing. We spent a lot of time in many companies with Shreddit and various services coming in to do our shredding and our sensitive information. You put those 300 employees out in their homes. We're shredded. Do they have pulverizers? What kind of information is being protected? If they print, is it wireless? Can it be intercepted? There are a lot of different issues that need to be addressed to protect information in that wide open environment. And people need to be educated, aware, and then they need to have the procedures and policies to protect information from those employees who don't understand the threat and do dumb things, and from those who fully understand the threat and are insiders and are trying to exploit it.
Right. Hey, Bruce, here's a question for you. Let's say you're traveling, which everybody is not traveling at the moment, but say you're Wi-Fi off Starbucks or your hotel. Would you personally trust the Wi-Fi open network to conduct your business on your laptop, or what's your thoughts professionally?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, airports, all kinds of hotels, airports, the example you gave at different restaurants and shops and things, all of those are vulnerable, and all of the places are being targeted. On the aircraft, if you're flying, you get on the Wi-Fi, it's subject to monitoring. And in some airlines, at some countries, you actually have intelligence services running those capturing information services on aircraft or in hotels. Wow. I got to be a friend of an individual who worked for Unit Sept of the French intelligence services, and he talked about how many hotel rooms they had to have, and I saw it, for example, in China, Japan, Korea. So not just China. Obviously, you go to China or Russia, it's going to happen. Maybe a little more obviously, but guess what? It happens a lot of places. You will see people and government agencies going into planting listening devices, cameras, monitoring the IT systems there and capturing data. If you leave your computer sit in your room, they'll come in and copy the hard drive. I actually did a test in a country and left mine, and it was indeed, as we brought it back and retraced, it was indeed copied. They copied my hard drive, but this was a test. We were pretty sure they would try and do that. They just confirmed that they did it. And it was government agencies in this case.
Now,
sometimes
going into
private.
Go ahead, Bruce. I cut you off.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Going into 2021, and to get off the election piece, we're seeing an increase in cyber attacks from whoever these foreign countries are and foreign actors are. It seems to me there's more collateral damage through cybersecurity attacks versus an actual war like Iraq. What are your thoughts of the future look like as we go into the information age and the IT world and the web keeps evolving? Is that going to be more of a risk, more trillions of dollars in losses than a war? What do you think on that?
Absolutely. I think you are correct, and there is more potential damage. In fact, there are some countries who, rather than preferring a direct military attack, would prefer, and their strategy is to take their adversaries down indirectly by taking down their businesses and the insides. Mark, if you look at, we're talking about an incident that just occurred, solar winds, a couple of days ago, and follow up. A couple of years ago, an intelligence service, cyber, came in and took a whole bunch of data from the Office of Personnel Management in the U.S. government, OPM. That should tell us a whole lot. It's not just the sensitive information on that particular system. they're actually looking in many cases, and we need to understand the modus operandi of intelligence services. They wanted personnel information and records, background investigations, jobs, personal problems, financial issues, anything that could help them recruit the right person or assess someone in a position for recruitment. That tells you how valuable having someone on the inside can be, either wittingly or unwittingly on the inside, because they put tremendous effort in that. You could look at it and say, well, what good did having a bunch of personnel records do? That's not going to be of great value on the international business or market. True. But it is a key piece of running an intelligent agent, is gathering that initial intelligence and assessment data. And that's exactly what they did. They went into the U.S. Office of Personnel Management and downloaded millions of records. That tells you how valuable. So the things, we have people saying, well, that's not that valuable. Yes, it is. We have to protect all kinds of information, not just the sensitive business research and development related stuff or the military or the high tech. I have dealt with spies who took information down, ran, and took over a tour company, one that took over a restaurant chain and brought it down and bought it cheaply, a portable toilet manufacturing company. I mean, I could give, portable toilets.
Wow.
In Singapore.
Honey bucket, of all things.
Exactly. It does not matter what your business is. It doesn't mean you'll never see espionage against your business. No. If you have competition, you will likely have someone trying to steal sensitive information. And they'll use IT if you let that go. They'll try and plant a spy. They'll try and recruit the cleaner. They'll do trash covers. If they could get in and plant a bug in your office conference room so they can talk to people. Those are all ways to gather information. I have given, as you can imagine, hundreds upon hundreds of presentations over the years around the world. And I've only had one time where I always ask in the business side of things, is there anybody in here who doesn't have a competitor? And one time I had, out of all the hundreds of presentations, I had a person say, I don't have a competitor. So I talked with this individual for a while after the presentation, and I ended up seeing this guy a year later, and he made a point to come up to me and tell me, oh, by the way, I now have multiple competitors, including people who stole some of my business information. So it was encouraging me to educate people, because he said he was a little skeptical, but he can't help but think, I was told, I just didn't understand it yet.
Wow. Pretty impressive. Hey, Bruce, I remember you telling me this story about your interaction of meeting Vladimir Putin. Can you tell us about that? Elaborate?
Yes. Well, that was in the military. As I said, I spent 3 years in Berlin. And as the Berlin Wall was coming down and the government was changing, I was with the Berlin Air Safety Center, and we were over in Dresden, Germany. For the first time, we had far more freedom to travel in what was known as East Germany. And it was transferring and going to become one Germany. Not a painless process. As you can imagine, communism marrying up with capitalism. One individual I had heard, Vladimir Putin, who was with the KGB at the time, was not very happy and has let that be known. One of my colleagues, who was not in OSI but was in the U.S. Air Force, said, oh, you two should meet. And I honestly did not know Vladimir Putin. I knew the name and his position, but I had not seen him. And he said, this is Vladimir Putin, and Mr. Putin, this is Colonel Bruce Wimmer. I, knowing he was a colonel at the time in the KGB, I said, hello, Colonel Putin, good to meet you. And I put my hand out to shake his hand, and he turned around and walked away briskly and looked back and said, I know of Colonel Wimmer. And my Air Force colleague with his hands out stood there like, wow, I've never seen that happen. I said, well, I tend to do that with Soviet intelligence officers, yeah. But little did I know what was going to happen to Vladimir Putin from being a colonel in the KGB in Dresden, Germany, and a very unhappy person at that particular point in time, and where he is now.
Hey, Bruce, I wonder if you were considered the most dangerous man in the world at that time with Vladimir Putin.
I don't think so.
I'll never forget that story. Well, at least you didn't have a hit from Vladimir Putin on your life like Al Qaeda did. That's a good thing, I guess.
Well, and I was targeted, by the way, for assassination by the New People's Army. And when I was at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, Mount Pinatubo, the volcano, blew up and destroyed Clark Air Base just as I was arriving. So I was the last U.S. Air Force person permanently assigned to Clark Air Base. But while there, we had the New People's Army staging attacks, and I was, again, trying to protect people. And I went to talk with the Philippine National Police about the threats, and they said, oh, by the way, Colonel Wimmer, the NPA has sent 2 Sparrow teams, which are hit teams, 2 Sparrow teams to Angeles City. And you want to know who the target is? Because we've got infiltrators. And I said, well, of course. And they said, you. And I said, very funny. Come on. It's not me. I'm not important. Who is it? And they said, no, it's you.
Wow.
So that's twice I've been targeted for assassination by international terrorist groups. And it's pretty sobering, of course, to hear your name, because I used to always note this in the private sector with senior executives for multinational corporations and in the government, be it department heads and general officers and stuff. Everybody says, what? Why would they want to do that to me? And here I am saying the same thing. It's human nature to say, what? Why would the NBA or Al Qaeda or somebody try and do this to me? Why would they spy on me? So it's a learning process where, say, it doesn't matter who you are and what level. I'm not at Vladimir Putin's level, but I faced espionage in Germany. For example, we got access after the wall came down and the governments were united to a lot of records from East German intelligence services. And I found out what I had been teaching people or trying to teach them and getting resistance that every one of our telephones, again, this is back in 88 to 91, so we did have some early bricks mobile phones, but by and large it was landlines. And we had individuals monitoring all of our phones, including mine. So I got to look at my own telephone records to see that I was indeed monitored, but I took them to some of my colleagues who were commanders of units and had resisted me and said, here's the intelligence file. You don't think they were monitoring you? And they're like, oh my gosh, they were monitoring me and my whole family. Yes, they were. And that's the point. It's similar to the terrorist situation and being known by Vladimir Putin. Guess what? I'd like to say I'm a rock star and a big threat and the most dangerous and I'm Jason Bourne. And no, I'm just a normal person at mid-level in career. And guess what? Whether it was military or the private sector, I was targeted by terrorist groups, by intelligence services. Yes, that is the world we live in.
I was listening to your story and I thought I was watching the Jason Bourne movie, autobiography of Bruce Wimmer. The threat from Vladimir Putin. He was so scared of you, you ran the other way.
Well, I don't know if he was scared, but he wasn't real fond of me. Let's put it that way. He didn't want to build a friendship.
You won't be getting a red carpet reception at the Kremlin by any chance anytime soon, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
Now, here's the question. I don't want to get political, so I'll stay away from that as much as I can. But what country is the biggest threat to our democracy right now in America?
Well, let me build it this way,
okay,
Mark. It's like we talked about earlier. There are a number of countries that would like to see the United States crumble. And the best way to do that is to undercut the confidence in the people in their government and to wipe out the business success of the United States. We've been very successful, and one of the best ways they can do that is to take out our confidence, undercut the government, and our business. So I think there are multiple countries that fit into that scenario. Certainly, if you're a communist or a strongly Islamic country that wants to see the fall of the United States, I mentioned some countries that are our allies, and I don't think that's the strategy as I understand it for most of them. But take those that are not our allies out. They're strictly trying to gain their own business success. That's their objective. And it stops pretty well there. But the other countries want to see the United States fail in business and fail in supporting the people. So that's their objective, and that's how they're going to attack us from multiple venues. Part of it, again, goes back to business espionage. If we can stop the United States, look at solar energy. We pumped trillions of dollars into solar energy in an effort to try and build up a more green energy base. But the Chinese, for example, took all that research and development, literally trillions of dollars worth, got it for absolutely next to nothing free by stealing it, by spying, and then put our solar companies out of business because they could produce equipment and use it without any investment. Trillions of dollars savings. So who's going to win in that business environment? So the United States then became reliant on China for solar energy and solar energy equipment. Yet we are the ones in the United States who did the research and development to make that industry start to go. It's that whole process, and you see it in dozens of different scenarios.
Right. It's like you're saying, the biggest threat we have is business espionage. If countries want to take us out in the United States, they just, get spies corporately and say, for example, ExxonMobil or any corporation, Facebook,
any corporation.
Apple. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
And then they start copying their information, take it over Russia, Saudi Arabia. It could be China. Who knows?
Yes, it could be any number of governments.
Because I know right now, politically, everybody's, hot and heavy over China because of the election, and then hot and heavy over Russia because of the election. And
sure.
I think it's like you're saying, it's a multinational attack by many countries on U.S. interests in the United States.
Well, you look at Iran, which is starting to already talking about getting back into the nuclear weapon building business. You look at Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, Iran. Now, we had a lot of sanctions, and we're working to try and make some changes there. But China and Russia, both for different reasons and different vectors, were helping those countries to get around the economic sanctions and things because their overall objective is to get where they're getting here, to get the United States to collapse economically.
Yeah, and for some reason, Bruce, I think Americans are still head in a bubble, and they believe we're indispensable, and they think we can't be touched.
Yes.
But you've proven just by the stories you've told on the podcast.
You are exactly right. Yes.
And we're believing the lies of the media. Unfortunately, being a Marine, I'm just pissed off right now with all the media outlets.
Well, it's the media. It's our political politicians. Again, there are exceptions across the board in the media and within the political realm, but a lot of people and a lot of elements are just not serving us well and adequately explaining what the threats are.
Yeah, I just recently saw a friend of mine showed me a Facebook picture of where the funds are going after they did the COVID-19 CARES bill. They were just renewed. And I'm seeing we're giving Venezuela like $20 million or something like that. And
wow.
These countries are infected with communist interest. Why are politicians giving them money? That could go to our business owners in America.
I was earlier this year in Ecuador and Chile.
Okay.
And in both places, and of course this was early in the year because before COVID travel restrictions were so strong. But what we saw was Venezuelans and Cubans coming in with Antifa to try and overthrow those governments and disrupt their elections. So I was looking at all the small businesses being attacked and burned, and I come back to the United States in our election year, and oh my gosh, here's Antifa, and here's some of the same tactics. We don't realize that Venezuelans, Cubans, but I talked to government officials there who actually had apprehended them at the airport trying to get in, and they had all kinds of plans on them. So this is, I don't want to turn it into a giant conspiracy, but it's far more explosive and large scale than I think a lot of us understand and would like to think. We want to live in that la-la land, as I didn't really want to believe that Al-Qaeda or the NPA were targeting me, but they are.
Right.
Sometimes. So you have to be realistic and say, okay, I'm going to practice what I preach. I got to try and save my life.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here, saving our lives and our country.
Absolutely. It's hard to imagine, like you say, yeah, here we see Antifa in Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and all over the country, taking a stand, and they're just down in Venezuela. It's like, what the heck?
That's right. They were just coming out of Venezuela and Cuba and going to Ecuador and Chile. Okay? So this is a global movement and global threats.
Now let's dissect Antifa real quick. Where's the funding coming from to fund those accounts with Antifa? Are those multinational countries with a Russian and Chinese interest, or what does that look like? Have you heard?
Well, again, it's Russian and Chinese, some Middle Eastern. There's all kinds of complex monies moving around to fund Antifa.
Wow.
Yep. And it's global money. So
global, exactly. That's a key point. And we're at a big risk right now because we just have an election, and the whole world is watching what happens.
That's
in
correct.
Election, January 2021. I think we're very vulnerable. Hence the cyber attacks. They're ramping up.
Yeah. But again, the Antifa and the physical attacks and all of these things, what did we find out just a few days earlier than the solar wind, which was the cyber attack? We found out that we have a member of Congress who was closely entwined with Chinese intelligence.
Oh, that's been all over the airway. Even CNN and all the other networks are covering that. I was shocked to see that they're covering
exactly. So, but the point is, it's the cyber attacks. It's planting individuals. That was a very normal human intelligence recruitment and planting technique. Money was changing hands, perhaps sexual favors, lots of traditional methodologies to plant someone in, gather information, assess, and maybe run certain things by.
Yeah, it sounds like that gentleman, that congressman, got basically a door pass to a committee level in Congress. I'm not going to say his name, but we all know who we're talking about.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah,
and
I can't believe the media's been covering that like they have. What
committee was it? Probably one of the most important committees from the espionage standpoint, and that's the Intelligence Committee.
Wow.
It wasn't a random attack. It was designed to get into that committee and get classified information.
And boy, did they ever.
Exactly.
But the media denies it.
That's beyond cyber. So we can protect the heck out of our cyber stuff, and we should, but we can't stop there.
Right. And I heard an interview on one of the networks saying that there was more than just that one individual in Congress that was involved.
Oh, yes. Again, and in this case, we were talking about the Chinese, but there are all kinds of countries involved, and they're all using those techniques, the modus operandi. It's a classic intelligence mode. So
you've seen it before.
No surprises. Yep.
Well, Bruce, I think you're going to be busy in 2021 and 2022.
Well, for almost 50 years, I've been busy, and it's not waning.
No, you got a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Your experience is going to be in demand here in, I think, a couple of years. Then you can retire.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Hey, Bruce, thanks for scratching out your Christmas week for us here at the Fearless Mindset Podcast. And for the viewers and the audio people, this is Bruce Wimmer. He's the Senior Director at G4S. He was a 21-year U.S. Air Force colonel as a special agent dealing with counter-espionage cases and investigations and all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, he is the living proof of Jason Bourne, the movie. So anyway, Bruce, get a little kick out of that one.
Exactly. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Merry Christmas to you and your family.